All right. Well, thank you very much for coming to participate to this very short debate. It's not really a debate, it's just an opinion. We call it conversation, crop conversation. And the topic today is root and tuber crops, food for tomorrow. And the principle is I'm going to ask each of you a question, and you can respond to that question for 5 to 7 minutes. We will record your responses, and then we will post this on the website, on several websites, maybe tonight, maybe later on. We don't know. Depends on communication facilities. So just to introduce the topic, as we showed this morning, root and tuber crops will play a very important role to feed the planet in the coming decades, probably much bigger than it was in the past. At least we believe that that's going to be the case. And the discussion today is to figure out, what is it that we need to do in order to effectively be in a position that we can use effectively these crops to feed the world. You have each a microphone now. I will ask each of you, before you answer the question, to give your name and affiliation or whatever you want, because we may eventually post each response separately. This is, I think, a very good introduction to ask a question to HRosling. Hans, I will ask you when you respond to, first of all, give your name and your affiliation. And my question to you is, what are the key challenges facing today's society as regards providing food for tomorrow for a much bigger population?
Yes, my name is HRosling. I'm professor in global health at Karolinska Institute. I'm a member of the Swedish Academy of Science, but most of all, I'm co-founder of Gapminder Foundation, where we have made success by explaining the global world trends on the internet and in different video formats. I was thinking when I heard you that we often say that no researcher should ever present their own results to the general public because they have a conflict of interest. And you said it yourself, the difficulty of really forwarding your own research, because it's important is in the context as you put the question to me. Now, it's easy to feed the population if the country is not poor. If the country has an economic basis, it can be flexible. You can have a problem with one crop, you can have a climate changing. You are flexible, you can change if your country has money. The problem is when your country doesn't have money. And it has brilliant young talent, but that young talent can't be put at work for research that is needed. And this is the problem, that where we have population growth today is where we have low economic levels. So that is the challenge. Guangxi Autonomous Region, many of us think about it as a province here in China, but it's called an autonomous region, has the same size as Uganda. The size of Guangxi and Uganda is identical. The population of Guangxi and Uganda is identical, about 40-50 million. The capital Kampala, which I know well, has some high rising. It doesn't compare to Nanning. Nanning has 5 to 10 million inhabitants, rising very rapidly. Kampala is going beyond the 2 millions now to 3 millions. Now the interesting thing is that the population will not grow much in Guangxi, but the population of Uganda by the end of this century is projected to be 200 million people, from 40 million today, 200 million people. Kampala will be twice the size of London. It will be 20 million people. This Nanning will be a small city compared to Kampala in the end of this century. This is for many of us not easy to understand. It's not easy to believe. It was as difficult as it was when I was a young child in school and they talked about China. And they said, oh, China, they know nothing. They are poor, they starve, they have communists, they won't make it. That was exactly what we were told. And about India, they say. Now China has changed completely, and we have great respect for the Chinese people, the professionals, and how the country has been led to this point where there is now. And I can see, having worked in Africa for so long in many different ways, there is no reason whatsoever that Africa won't make it. I can see it in the young talent in Africa. I can see it in the economic growth we are seeing now. But it's an enormous size of the population there will be in Africa. Today there is 1 billion people in Europe and 1 billion people in Africa. 1-1. By the end of this century, it will be 1 billion in Europe and 4 billions in Africa. So my advice to Europeans is to start to be polite to Africans already today. That will be very polite to Africans because they will outnumber us. They will outnumber us. Nigeria is projected to have the same population as China by the end of this century. I repeat, Nigeria is projected to have the same population size as China by the end of this century because China will be shrinking. China will be shrinking. I saw it in the park yesterday. There was one-child families out in the park. China is shrinking. Nigeria is growing. So, in able to do this, what you say, you don't have to go into any details about cassava or tuber crops, as you have done. What is mainly grown in Africa has to be grown much, much better than it is today. Much, much better. And that harvest has to be protected against diseases, so it doesn't get the backlash. And that's just by the simple numbers you can see that. You just need to increase that. There's an enormous amount of development needed in Africa. And the world has money for it. Money has never been as cheap as now. Because the price of money is interest rate. That is the price of money. And interest rates are very low, except in Africa, where they are very high. Because Africa lacks capital. Have skill, have potential, and have a lot of needs, but lack the capital. So capital has to be moved. And it has to be moved in very many different ways. To me, it's very obvious that the research intensity into root and tuber crops has to be multiplied many times over. Many times. Just because of the fact that where people live now and grow those root and tuber crops, that's where the population will increase. So it's very straightforward. If you go really backwards, if you go into the details and look into the next 5 years, it's more difficult to argue. Because you can, how have you calculated this curve and so on. This is really needed. Just imagine Uganda and Guaishi, and Uganda with 4 or 5 times as more people. And they have to invest. Another thing, you have to invest in maize research also. You have to invest in potato research. You have to invest in rice research. You have to invest in agricultural research, into forestry, into a lot of different research for the tropical areas which have not been done before. It's a great need, and the money is around and it's moving. It will be moving. I'm more worried about what you mentioned, the institutions that will take care of that money. Form the institutions that are not just programs. That is the problem. I see you have no core budget, you have no possibility to plan for the long term. It's strange that we have, this is private money. This is private money. It's not so big. Bill and Melinda Gates give $3 billion a year to help the poor end of the world. My country, Sweden, in development aid gives $6 billion. Little Sweden, we are twice as big as Bill and Melinda Gates, but we don't give it as cleverly as they do. They've managed to put it where it's make more need. So I think governments in the world as a whole have to take responsibility for the research on the major crops on the world and create an institutional basis for that. And perhaps China could be the leading nation for that, for making that happen in the new world. As the infrastructure development bank now that has emerged in Shanghai, could there be a new agricultural research bank which is initiated by China and that the rest of the world will join into it?
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to listen to what you are coming up with. Thank you to be here and to respond to this question.